Hey gang, welcome back to Screenwriting in Paradise, the podcast and maybe the vlog. Here I am down by the beach. I really am by the beach. You might hear the lapping of the water. And in today's episode, I will again be looking for gold and explaining how fate is created in storytelling and great films. Today's film is called Full Metal Jacket. If you haven't seen it, go see it now. Turn this off, go watch the movie. Although there will be no spoiler alerts. I'm talking about the beginning of the movie. Well, there'll be some spoilers, but hey, go see the movie if you're worried about that. But I've already done the YouTube version. So if you want to just, see me live with or see me on tape with a bunch of clips, little short clips, because I don't let you show big clips, that's fine. But what I like doing in this visual storytelling podcast is actually recreating the film in your brain, because of course you can't see it. And like I think I've said before, it's basically how we tell stories. Even when you read a book, you naturally just sort of visualize what's happened. So I will try to go through this sequence of Full Metal Jacket as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, and hopefully we'll both take something from it, and it'll be educational and fun, and a totally different view on storytelling, and how Kubrick in this case is such a master of creating fate. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. The beginning of Full Metal Jacket, it begins with, and the storytelling and the creating fate that goes with that. So really the opening sequence over the credits is a bunch, probably like 15 or 20 cadets, future Marines, getting their heads shaved by a military barber, probably on Parris Island in South Carolina. And it goes through each of them as this funny song. It's like a country song about Vietnam plays in the background. So you basically see these guys with a full head of hair like mine, and there's just a guy with a, like with one of those hair trimmer things or shavers. It's just like 4 stripes, and all your hair is gone, and you are bald. And basically, I know I'm actually pretty good friends with Jan Harlan, who produced that film, and he was there. And the whole point of that opening was, uniformity, getting everybody, of course, uniform, but basically how we target 18-year-olds, and actually all these actors are like 25, and most of them are British extras, actually, because it was all shot just outside of London, because Stanley, who's American from New York, moved to London and never wanted to leave and didn't like to fly, so he shot that film outside of London at an old gasworks place. But I digress. These guys were basically 18 years old, and the whole idea is that you get them young, of course, and you humiliate the hell out of them. And that begins with shaving off their hair, right? So one of the first customers at the barber is this guy named Private Pile. Actually, his name's Leonard, but he's dubbed Private Pile in a moment. But you actually see him. And you also see the Matthew Modine character, who's the hero of the film, who also will be dubbed Private Joker. You see his head getting shaved as well. You see all of them. And then it cuts to they're outside, Parris Island, doing some marching and running around. And when they come back inside to the barracks, this guy, Matthew Modine, the actor, who again was about to be dubbed Private Joker, makes a joke. Subsequently, Private Joker. But his joke is he does a John Wayne imitation. And if you don't know who John Wayne was, he was basically a great, cowboy actor from 1930 to 1980 or whenever he died. He lived like 50 years. One of his last films was like True Grit, which was actually remade by the Coen brothers. And that's a great film actually as well. But, he was a great actor, kind of into politics and stuff. So, don't go there. But anybody who's like over 50 knows who John Wayne is. Anybody under 50, who knows? But the bottom line is he had a great Western drawl, the way he talked. He's, I'm John Wayne. And Matthew Modine actually mimics him in the barracks when they are all standing at attention with this drill sergeant in the distance walking around checking on these guys. They're all standing like in front of their bunk beds, I believe. And Matthew Modine's character's way at the far end. So the drill sergeant can't see him, and he's like how you doing, partner, or something like that. I can't remember what he says exactly, but he's basically mimicking John Wayne and creating a joke, which is absolutely insane to do in front of a drill sergeant, because these guys are notoriously evil, or at least cranky and angry. And so, of course, this drill sergeant, who's a fabulous actor, who again, my friend Yen Harlan, the producer of the movie, discovered. He was actually a security guard at a local energy plant, of all things, who had been a drill sergeant. I think they put an ad in the paper, we need a drill sergeant for advice, because Stanley Kubrick didn't know anything about drill sergeants and how to write the dialogue. You know how they had that sort of rhyming, sing-songing thing when they march, and they also, are just very verbal when they get in your face and give you a hard time when you're doing push-ups and stuff like that. So this guy, Lee Emery, was a former drill sergeant, who's now a security guard, who Yen discovered or brought in just to give Kubrick advice for whatever actor was going to be playing the drill sergeant. And Lee was so darn good at recreating, or just off the cuff coming up with these amazing diatribes from drill sergeants, or his own drill sergeant history. They're all very crude, rude, and nasty, and perfect. But he was so good at it that Stanley said, basically threw his clipboard over his shoulder and said, "We don't need to find an actor, we're going to use you." And hired him. And, he went on to a pretty good acting career, actually. But he is, he makes at least the beginning of this wonderful film, Full Metal Jacket, so memorable. He is the ultimate drill sergeant on film. There have been a few of them in other films, but he's so good in this, and intimidating. So basically, he comes charging across the floor of the dormitory, the barracks, over to the Matthew Modine character, or near, because he didn't know which guy had said it, because they're all standing in line, right? They're like in a long row in front of their beds, or their bunks, standing at attention. And he starts barking at the guy next to Modine and saying, "Hey, Private, was that you?" And the guy's like, "No, sir." And then Matthew Modine's character fesses up, says, "It was me, sir." And Lee Emery, or actually his name is Drill Sergeant, I'll think of it in a second. I'll just call him Drill Sergeant. And the drill sergeant, Hartman, he comes over, and so Drill Sergeant Hartman comes over and gets in Modine's face, like nose to nose, and starts barking at him, and basically belts him in the stomach, like a quick jab. So he, bends over coughing, and suddenly he's no longer joking around. He's realizing, how screwed he is, the seriousness of the situation he's in. He wasn't taking it very seriously up until then. And then Drill Sergeant Hartman continues to get in his face and says, "What's your name?" Or actually, forget your name. Your name from now on is Private Joker, because he was joking, right? And that sticks with him for the rest of the movie. Actually, he's called Private Joker, which is important. So then he goes on. Drill Sergeant Hartman moves on to the next Marine, like 2 or 3 actually people down, and that is this guy Leonard, this kind of overweight, goofy guy, not, the most intellectual person in the world. Let's just say he's not very bright. He's just a young, innocent, overweight, challenged kid. And he gets in his face and starts barking at him, because basically Leonard is smiling. He's literally got a shit-eating grin on, kind of a goofy grin. And it's all because he was kind of laughing at the whole interaction between Sergeant Hartman and Private Joker. And he just can't help himself smiling. And this really gets Lee Emery, or rather Drill Sergeant Hartman, going, and gets him really upset, and he starts really ranting and raving and barking nose to nose with this, or face to face with this poor young private. And he makes him get down on his knees, because he can't stop smiling. And he says, "Take that smile off your face and choke yourself." And he literally takes, Sergeant Hartman takes his own hand and opens his thumb and forefinger, so they're curved, and puts them around his neck, around the private's neck. Oh no, wait. I'll just backtrack for 1 second. Before he makes him squat down to choke himself, he says, "I'm going to call you Gomer Pyle, or Private Pyle." Gomer Pyle, aka Private Pyle. And if you don't know that character, again, some of these things are topical. In the early '60s, I believe there was a show called the, I can't believe I remember this, called the Andy Griffith Show. It's a funny show. Definitely watch it with like Doughnut, and actually Opie was, his son was Ron Howard. He's a huge director now. He's done all sorts of movies like Splash and Backdraft. And, big movie director, but he's a great actor. He's also the star of Happy Days, if you ever saw that old show. But as a teenager or a 20-year-old. But as a little kid, he was on the Andy Griffith Show. And again, I digress. I'm sorry, but it's just a reference to Gomer Pyle, because Gomer Pyle was also on the Andy Griffith Show, and he was so funny. He's this kind of goofy, gas station attendant, I think, or something. But then he goes into the Marines, and so they actually made a spin-off called Gomer Pyle. So from like 1965 to 1968 or something, there was this funny sitcom about a goofy Marine private called Gomer Pyle. And that is the reference, okay, to, 1987's film called Full Metal Jacket, where they have a guy named Private Pyle. So he says, from now on, you're Gomer Pyle. Okay, Private Pyle, on your knees. So he makes him get down on his knees, and he puts his arm, or hand again, his thumb and his forefinger around his neck, and says, choke yourself. And of course, Private Pyle doesn't know what he's talking about. He just kind of leans into Sergeant Hartman's hand, and then Sergeant Hartman starts choking him, and he's like, bulging eyes and all that stuff, and he's really freaking out, and he finally lets him go, and of course he doesn't kill him, but it freaks him out. But the main thing, you guys, is this is the first of like 7 or 8 really humiliating incidents that again, Drill Sergeant Hartman puts on this poor plebe, this poor cadet, Private Pyle, as I'll call him from now on, not Leonard. And so I'll just go through those to show how Stanley Kubrick created fate in this whole opening sequence. It's an amazing opening sequence. It's before they go to war. It's all set again at boot camp, which is, I guess Parris Island, South Carolina. Never been there, but it's like the home of boot camps. It's a big boot camp place, for the Marines before they go overseas. And I think it's the Marines, might be the Army. Anyway, irrelevant. It's military. And so he sets up this, again, Kubrick's a brilliant storyteller, extremely meticulous. He goes over this whole story. He goes over this whole introduction to the rest of the film, which is set in Vietnam, by creating this incredible story within a story, this fate. That's what I'm focusing on here. That's the whole thing about, we're all storytellers. This is great storytelling by Kubrick. So to do that, to create this fate, he, of course, focuses on this dude, Private Pyle, the problem child in his squad, right? Out of these 20 guys, this is the guy he's going to focus on. So the first time it's all about humiliation also. Remember, they're getting their hair cut and all that stuff. But he doesn't focus on any of the other cadets, maybe off screen, when we don't see it. But what we're witnessing is Private Pyle's abuse and eventual madness, and how he gets him from point A to point B to point C, the climax, which will, again, as far as creating fate goes, basically get him and Private Joker into the latrine at the end of the whole sequence for something huge that's going to happen. But to get there, you have to make it remarkable, right? And conflictual and interesting and educational even. So that's what Kubrick does so masterfully. And what he does, again, with Private Pyle, is the first thing he does is he chokes him. That was the first of many instances where he humiliates him. And then it cuts to the following day, or maybe the same day, and they're again outside, lined up in formation, and they're holding their rifles, like they're at attention, or their rifles straight up, and they're supposed to like turn them around and something like that. And he's saying, "You're left, you're right, you're left, you're right," and Pyle can't do it. He's just out of formation, out of sync with everybody else. So of course, Sergeant Hartman goes over there and gets in his face and starts barking at him and says, "Don't you know your left from your right, Pyle?" And Pyle can't do it. He's like, going the opposite direction. It's just totally spazzed. And Hartman literally slaps him on his left side of his face, say, "That's your left. Where's your right?" And Pyle's speechless, so he hits him on the right side. So he's abusive, physically abusive and mentally abusive. And that's just the second of like these multiple humiliations he does of Pyle, and it's followed immediately by them marching. So they're marching around on the, the grounds, the fields outside of this, the barracks, and with other squads in the distance. And in the back of these 20 or 25, young men who are marching in perfect unity is Private Pyle with his pants down around his ankles and sucking his thumb as, Sergeant Hartman barks at them all. So he's made him, be a big baby, so to speak, literally. And to, make matters worse, he has his pants down around his ankles. He has boxer shorts on, of course, but it's just like so humiliating, right? So that's 3 times. He's already done that like the first 5 minutes of this introduction. And I think that's actually followed by the ropes course sequence, where they have this big outdoor ropes course with a, like, for lack of a better word, like a jungle gym kind of thing, where they have to climb up like, 40 feet or something and go over the top of it. And up at the top is Sergeant Hartman screaming at them all to get up and over, up and over. And of course, Private Pyle is terrified of heights and not the most athletic dude in the world, so he can barely get up there. And when he gets to the top, all he has to do is like swing his leg over and go down the other way on the opposite side, and he can't do it. He's too scared. He's too scared to go over the top. And it's just a great visual. You got Drill Sergeant Hartman there barking at him, like in his ear, "Get over, you! Are you a quitter? Are you a quitter, Private Pyle?" excuse me. And Pyle can't do it, and he is forced to quit. Like the ultimate humiliation up until then. The poor guy. So he has to climb back down, like terrified, like hugging every bar as he climbs down, because he's too scared to go up and over the top, even though he's getting screamed at by Sergeant Hartman to do so. And so instead he gets screamed at for being a quitter the whole way down. And that literally, so that's 4 times, immediately cuts to them running out in some like jungle road. Well, not a jungle because they're South Carolina, but like an old dirt road. The whole troops, they're all running and going through water and stuff like that. And again, Private Pyle's in such horrible shape because he's kind of overweight and obviously not used to running. And literally Private Joker and another guy who's sympathetic are trying to help Pyle run. They're holding him by his elbows, and he's like got his head like and neck like bent over sideways because he's like panting and can barely barely run. He's so exhausted and probably horrified or terrified. And guess what? Sergeant Hartman's right there also yelling in his ear, "Private Pyle, can't you even run 1 mile long?" or something like that. Anyway, screaming and yelling. And so it was like 5 humiliations in a row. And then finally, we cut to maybe the next day or that evening, and they're again in formation. They're not in formation. They're in the barracks, in their, getting ready for bed. And again, Drill Sergeant Hartman marches in and screams for this other dude, I forget what his name was, to come over and stand in front of him and Private Joker. And he says, to the other private, say, "Private, you're the squad leader here." And the guy's like, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." He goes, "Okay, you're a lousy squad leader. I'm replacing you with Private Joker, because Private Joker is going to deal with this, miscreant, this loser," or whatever he calls him, Private Pyle. "He's going to get Private Pyle in shape, so I don't have to deal with it anymore." And he's like, "Are you good with that, Private Joker?" And Private Joker's like, "Sir, yes, sir," because that's what they always have to say to their drill sergeant. "Sir, yes, sir." If you remember Forrest Gump, with Tom Hanks, was a great drill sergeant in that. Not nearly as good as Lee Emery, but still really good. And it's the same thing. They go, "Sir, yes, sir," or "Sir, yes, drill sergeant," whatever his name is, "sir," in Forrest Gump. But the bottom line is that, yes, Private Joker is now the squad leader. And so for those, following 1 or 2 days, Private Joker actually starts to perform, because he's not getting screamed at and intimidated by Drill Sergeant Hartman anymore. It's his friend, Private Joker, trying to help him out. So he actually can do the lower level of the ropes course, for instance, and he can actually march in line now and kind of deal with his gun or clean it properly. A couple of those things where he's making improvements, not huge improvements, baby steps, but he's not as useless as Drill Sergeant Hartman made him out to be, or was driving him to be. And that all, unfortunately, takes a huge negative turn right after that. So what happens is, literally, they have yet another kind of roll call in the dormitory. It's an unbelievable visual. I mean, you really got to go see this film if you haven't seen it. But basically, all the cadets are in their underwear, like boxer shorts and white undershirts, and they're standing on their foot lockers. So apparently, you all get your own little locker, to keep your clothes or your privates in or whatever, your stuff in, and so they're all forced to stand in a long row, like in front of all their beds again. So there's probably like 10 or 12 on one side and 10 and 12 on the other. And they're all holding their hands up like they're going to a manicurist or something, and totally at attention, but their hands are both in front of them. And what Drill Sergeant Hartman is doing is he's doing a fingernail and toenail or health inspection. So he's kind of strolling along, looking at everybody's feet and toenails and fingernails to make sure they're perfectly clean, right? Because he is crazy, or else he's just a wild, wacky drill sergeant who's, cares about his job. But the bottom line is that when he gets to Private Pile, he stops. So the visual is he's kind of like slowly strolling past all these guys, inspecting them, and they're all just standing at attention, including Private Pile. But when he gets there, and they're all standing on their boxes, their little foot lockers. And when he gets to Private Pile, he looks down at his foot locker. He goes, "Holy shit!" And he leans over and he goes, "Private Pile!" And he picks up the lock off of Private Pile's foot locker because it's not locked. And apparently that's a rule. They have to be locked at all times. And so it was unlocked, so he actually picks it up and he shoves it in Private Pile's face and says, "What is this?" Private Pile goes, "It's my lock, sir." And he goes, "Why is your foot locker unlocked?" "I forgot, sir." He goes, "God damn it, Private Pile." And he leans over and he picks up he pushes him off his foot locker. He picks up the box, he empties it, and out comes a jelly donut. Right? And he goes, "What the fuck is this?" And he picks it up and he again shoves that in Private Pile's face. And he's like, "A jelly donut, sir." He goes, "Why the hell do you have a jelly donut?" He goes, "Because I was hungry, sir." And he goes, anyway, the bottom line is that he goes completely off. Sergeant Hartman goes nuts, makes Pile take his foot locker and put it in the middle of the room and makes him stand on it, shoves the jelly donut into his mouth, and he can't hold it with his hands. So he's sitting there with suffocating on a jelly donut. And the others are still standing at attention with their hands in front of them, like, for the manicurist thing. And Sergeant Hartman parades around the room, screaming at all these guys, saying, "You're all worthless scum. And the reason that Private Pile is not being a good Marine like he should, and he's eating frigging jelly donuts, is because you guys are not motivating him to be a good soldier. And that means you guys are going to pay the price for that jelly donut. And basically he's going to abuse them. He's going to make them do massive push-ups and running and goddamn knows, whatever kind of torture he's going to make them do physically because of Pile's jelly donut. And of course, this gets his friends, his squad associates upset with him. And of course, that is Sergeant Hartman's, intention. More peer pressure, maybe he wants him out of the Marines, I don't know. But the bottom line is it's the ultimate humiliation. And he's already been through 5 or 6 from the, getting strangled to having his face slapped to, getting barked at and quitting on the top of that, jungle gym ropes course thing. And here he is with a jelly donut stuffed in his mouth, and all of his colleagues or all his, fellow cadets are, sort of looking at him through the corner of their eye as they get blamed for his jelly donut. So you cut to that evening and it's dark out, they're all in their beds sleeping, and you see a close-up of a bar of soap on a towel. And it gets folded over, and then we realize all the cadets are sneaking over to Private Pile's bed with these, bars of soap wrapped up in towels. And one of them is actually the guy who was trying to help him earlier, not Private Joker, but the other guy who was their friend, his friend, he thought, puts the towel in his mouth, so he, because he's sleeping, but he puts his towel in his mouth so when they start hitting him, his screams will not be heard by Sergeant Hartman, who I'm sure is happy to have him scream. But the bottom line is that all of them take turns, one at a time, coming over and hitting poor poor Private Pyle with their soap bars in a towel, and he's screaming in pain, Rah! And they one after another, and the last one is his real true ally, Private Joker, and he sees Private Joker. So it's a huge moment, because after that, basically Pyle is done. He's gone over the edge. He's gone to the dark side. He is fried, right? He's suffered every humiliation, and the only thing, his only hope, and that was, he actually said earlier when Private Joker was in charge of him and helping him, he said, "I just need help," and basically Private Joker tried, but now he said, "You're helpless," and he will not help him. Not only won't he help him, he'll beat the hell out of him for having a jelly donut. That's what's so masterful by Kubrick in this sequence, because these guys have been driven to madness themselves. They've been forced to beat the hell out of, one of their squad mates, people that they're going to war with possibly, to beat him up with, a bunch of soap bars because he had a jelly friggin' donut. Over nothing. And it's of course it's like basically an analogy for war. What are we fighting for? And I'll talk about that at the end. But seriously, it's about nothing. The evil men can do. So quickly to end this little sequence, basically, the very next scene, I believe, is they're outside. It's the next day. They're in formation, marching, and again, Sergeant Hartman has Private Pyle now sitting in a chair watching them march, and he's literally sucking his thumb. So it's like humiliation number 7 or 8. And slowly, he actually, ironically, gets better. Not better socially. I mean, you can see his eyes are withdrawn, and he's losing it. But he seems to, it's actually when he's shooting his gun, because his only friend becomes his gun, because now nobody will talk to him, including Private Joker. And, Private Joker's a little worried about him, mentally, because he's like talking to his gun like it's a person. But he actually is a really good shot. And, one thing that, the Sergeant Hartman likes and wants is good shots. He needs marksmen for, his graduating class, because that's very important in war, right? And, lo and behold, Private Pyle happens to be a really good shot. And so Sergeant Hartman at the shooting range notices this and gets down next to him and says, "Oh my God, you're actually good for something. I thought you were good for nothing, Private Pyle, but you're one hell of a shot. Maybe I can make a Marine out of you yet." That kind of thing. And then because of that one sequence, there's a few more after that where he's actually marching in form. He can do his gun properly. He's actually what all drill sergeants actually want, a clean slate. You erase their brain and their, inefficiencies, and create a new robot, a new, clean, mean fighting machine for the military to send them over to Vietnam or whatever war they're fighting at the time, right? And Drill Sergeant Hartman is thus happy with him. And guess what? He graduates. So we cut to like the military graduation, where they're all in spiffy uniforms, and including Private Pyle, they're marching. But the thing is, you can see in Private Pyle's eyes that he's not there. Even though he's actually rebounded miraculously at the end, because he's been, tortured into becoming a soldier. He's actually not there. He's void, and he is gone to the dark side, literally. He is this kind of, I don't even know how to describe it visually, a withdrawn, insane look on his eyes, in his face. It's hollow. There's nothing there, and it's kind of murderous. But, initially, maybe you wouldn't notice it, but, you wouldn't want to be alone with the guy, put it that way. But the bottom line is that he graduates, and that night, like, they've all got their assignments, and he's actually, going to go, I think, to Vietnam or something. And that night in the barracks, it just happens to be, and it's probably their last night there, now I think about it, but it just happens to be that night watch duty is for Private Joker. And of course, and again, it's creating fate. This is storytelling by Stanley Kubrick. You have to have Private Joker be on night watch because he's going to find Private Pyle in the bathroom, in the latrine, which he does right now. He goes into the latrine because he hears some noises, and he's got his flashlight. It's dark, so apparently you have, again, I didn't even know this, education in military stuff, but you have, one of the plebes, one of the cadets every night is a night watchman, probably walking around making sure everyone's sleeping and not, beating people up with soap bars, I guess. But he goes into the bathroom, and there is Private Pyle sitting on a row of toilets. It's another amazing visual, these long rows of toilets with like no sides next to them. So everybody has to go to the bathroom next to each other. So, again, the humiliation of the military, or just how the unity, everyone's uniform, everyone's the same, right? So he's just sitting on this toilet, not going to the bathroom, but he's sitting there with his gun, and he is literally gone insane. He has gone insane. His face is like, his jaws drop toward the ground, and he looks up with these sullen eyes, like, and kind of this weird, toothy grin. Like, he has just gone way over to the dark side. He is about to do, about to go postal, basically. And of course, Private Joker's horrified, and he's like looking at the gun, and he says, "Is that gun locked and loaded?" Because he's basically been loading it with a magazine. And as he says that, Private Pyle stands up and does the whole routine with the gun, where they flip it around, he goes, "Hey, hey," and, with the Marine thing, when they start yelling about their guns, and, "The bullet goes here, this, that, there." I don't know how they say it, but they yell a lot. And of course, it wakes up everybody in the dorm, because, they're just in the bathroom or the latrine at the end of the hall. And so you cut out there, and of course, Sergeant Hartman comes running out in his boxer shorts and his hat on. He always has his hat on. "What the hell's going on?" And he screams at all the other cadets, the 20 of them getting out of their beds, to get back into bed. And he charges into the bathroom and sees what's going on and can't believe it. He's like, "What the hell are you doing, Private Pyle?" And, Private Joker warns him. He says, "Sir, he's got his gun and it's locked and loaded, sir." And then Sergeant Hartman looks at, Private Pyle with his maniacal, suicidal look on his face. Not Sergeant Hartman, but Private Pyle. He's just, again, you've probably seen the poster if you've ever seen the movie, but his face is death, basically, or about to commit mass death for other people. And doesn't faze Sergeant Hartman one bit. He just marches over him. He's like, "Put that gun down on the floor now, Private, or I will, stick it down your neck or up your butt," or whatever he says. And as he says that, literally, Pyle lifts the weapon and just blows him away. Just puts a bullet through the middle of his chest, and he flies backwards, dead. And then he kind of looks over, like panting or gasping slowly at Private Joker, who, if you haven't seen the movie, and this is no big spoiler, but we'd assume, or we're worried that he's next, but he's not. He gives him a reprieve, a get out of jail card, free for whatever reason. And Pyle goes over and sits back down on the toilet and blows his brains out, right? And that's, the ending of the introduction. It literally goes to the, cuts from there, smash cut to Saigon with, like, some street prostitutes kind of swinging along to that wonderful, Frank Sinatra's daughter's song, "These Boots Are Made for Walking," Nancy Sinatra. Check it out on Spotify. Literally, so it goes, Private Joker goes from witnessing the madness of, the demise of Pyle and his drill sergeant to Vietnam, where, again, like, I guess the Vietnamese prostitutes are coming towards him as he's sitting there with a fellow Marine on leave duty with this music blaring, and, chaos in Saigon, during the war. The war's not happening there, but he's in the city. But that's irrelevant to the introduction. It's just to show that he Kubrick immediately takes them to Vietnam. But what Matthew Modine's character, Private Joker, brings with him is this whole knowledge of what happened to him on Paris Island, right? He had to witness the madness of war before he even goes to war. And that's where Kubrick is brilliant, because he shows how it all happens, the madness of war happens at home, even before you need to go to Vietnam. And, this one in particular is all over a jelly donut, a jelly friggin' donut. And I love that. It could have been, a Snickers bar or a piece of pizza that he'd hidden in his footlocker, or even like a cop donut, like a regular round donut they dip in coffee. But no, a jelly donut, it's just the perfect, you know, nonity for the insanity of war. What are we fighting about, people? That's, basically the message. What the hell are we doing? This poor kid could have been home fishing. Instead, we drag him through the mud until he's ready to kill somebody, and he does, stuff a jelly donut in his friggin' mouth. So that jelly donut is actually the instigation for this whole thing, That's when Private Pile goes over the deep end and takes us on this ride of insanity even further, right? So again, I think Kubrick is really bringing us in his wonderful, efficient storytelling and smart storytelling to the simple conclusion that not only is war hell, it's insane. Why are we doing this? So I hope that made a little bit of sense, but it's a terrific film, and all of Kubrick's films are well thought out. But this is really great storytelling, and the whole creating fate thing is what I was hoping to point out, or hoping that you get here. That basically, you get, at the start of this film, you got to have this one Marine get broken and not only kill himself, but kill his drill sergeant, right? And you got to have a third Marine, this is all about creating fate, witness it. And that's Private Joker. So Private Joker witnesses the destruction of Private Pile, and actually, again, it's an allegory for humanity itself. Again, what are we doing, people, before we even go over to the madness of Vietnam or whatever war, World War II, Japan, Germany. It's crazy, crazy, crazy stuff that we do. And I think Kubrick is, the one director who's really taken a anti-war, flag into the trenches, both with obviously his earlier film called Dr. Strangelove, which dealt with, the threat of nuclear proliferation, and this one. Basically, war is not smart, and he was a smart guy. All right, I'll be doing another one of these soon. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know.